Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to CCCA's webinar about active collections. My name is Erica Donis, and I am the current president of the Collections Care and Conservation Alliance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon with us. I'm so glad that you're here. So I'm going to share just a brief introduction about CCCA, and then I'll turn things over to our presenters. So the Collections Care and Conservation Alliance is a nonprofit network of conservation and preservation professionals who seek to improve collections care by providing information and education. We are made up of a network of professionals from across the United States, coming from a wide variety of jobs within the cultural heritage sector. And your attendance at today's webinar is a great example of how we bring together people from across different settings within the cultural heritage field. Joining us today, we have folks from historical societies, academic special collections, children's museums, and more. So welcome to all of you. CCCA is based in Vermont, but we have members from around the United States, both professional affiliate members and emerging professional members. And I want to extend a special welcome to a couple of new members who I know are joining us today. So thank you so much for joining. And if you aren't already a member, I invite you to visit our website to learn more about our member benefits. And we'll be putting somebody who's already on it, put the link to our website right in the chat for you. So we do offer multiple programs each year, including several webinars like this one. And included in the registration for the webinar is the opportunity to attend a follow-up virtual conversations with colleagues session with our speakers, which is designed to be an informal setting to pose additional questions that arise after today's webinar. It's also a great opportunity for those folks who registered but weren't able to attend live to catch up with additional questions they may have. The Conversation with Colleagues event that is accompanying this webinar will occur next Wednesday, December 10th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And the link to that Zoom meeting will be included in the follow-up email sent that will go out after this meeting to everybody who's registered. And that email will also include a link to the recording. So before I turn things over to our presenters, I've been asked to pose a request to you, which is to put in the chat some information about what kind of knowledge or experience you have coming into this session with active collections. Are you familiar with the term? Have you perhaps done any additional professional development? Are you exploring or already practicing active collections work for your organization? So please feel free to go ahead and put your comments about active collections into the chat. And with that, I'm now going to turn things over to Eileen Corcoran, who is the Director of Service and Outreach at the Vermont Historical Society, and our first speaker this afternoon. Thanks, Eileen.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica. We're excited to be here with you today and looking forward to talking with you more about active collections. I'm going to start my screen share in a second while you guys, you folks put some info on your active collections experience in there. All right. I think we are at the slideshow. So welcome again to our Introduction to Active Collections workshop. Excited to be here with you all today. And so we thank you for putting everything in the chat, and we're going to make you continue to work. And this is our first poll, Kelly. So if you can do poll number 1, which is going to ask you to tell us how your collections make you feel. And so this is, use a word or two about your collections. These can be positive thoughts, make us feel anxious, negative. They can be a mix. They can be kind of whatever when you say, what do your collections make you feel about? And we will share those answers in just a second. So think about how you're feeling about your collections today. And I'm going to try to get to the next slide. Maybe. Okay. So just a little background on ourselves. My name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm the Director of Service and Outreach at the Vermont Historical Society. And part of my work is helping historical societies and museums across the state of Vermont with professional development, networking, and training. And part of that is working on our Activating 21st Century Local History Training Program, which Hannah Kirkpatrick is our program coordinator for. So, Hannah, did you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Hannah Kirkpatrick. As Eileen said, I coordinate the active collections training program for local historical societies around Vermont. Museums and libraries are also welcome. We love anyone who collects pieces of history. And I have a background as a historian and also in leading peer learning groups in research institutions in Vermont as well. So this has been a really fun job for me, and I have learned to love active collections over the last year.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And then our third presenter is Rainey Tisdale, who is one of the co-founders of the Active Collections movement. Rainey.
Hi, y'all. It's great to be with you on this call. See all of you interested in active collections. I'm just down the road from y'all in Vermont. I live in Portland, Maine, and I am a museum consultant. I've spent my whole career working with museums and historic sites, and at this point, I do a lot of planning for different cultural organizations, whether it's planning exhibits and content projects, collections planning, in more strategic planning or interpretive planning. And I'm one of the founders, as Eileen says, of the active collections movement. And so I've spent now at this point maybe 15 years thinking really, really hard and talking to a lot of people about the health of our collections in the United States and the health of our collections operations and our collections workers. Glad to be here.
Great, thank you so much, Rainey. And so here's just our general agenda for the workshop today. We're going to have what we called Real Talk About Collections with Rainey, which is great. And then Introduction to Active Collections Concepts. So we're going to talk a bit about a few of the primary activities you can do with active collections. And then we're going to talk a little bit about active collections in action. There's a lot of active in that, activating local history program with Hannah. And then basically our learning goals for today. We hope to provide a basic understanding of active collections values and concepts. And it sounds like from at least a little bit of your chat, we have folks who are not too familiar. So hopefully this will be some really good information for you. Hopefully to sort of work on a better understanding of your own collection. So starting to integrate some of these ideas into the work that you do to understand your collections better. And then talking about a few practical steps you can take to implement your active collections components. So Kelly, so do the poll results actually display if we do that? I'm seeing it says viewing the poll results, but it doesn't actually show the answers. So I don't know what anybody answered about how your collections make you feel. But hopefully they're interesting and maybe we can figure out how to show those words as we come. But the idea behind that is just to think about, whether it's positive or negative, how we can take any of those kind of negative views or feelings that you have about your collection and move them more towards the positive side. And that's kind of one of our hopes what active collections can do is really energize yourself, the work that you do, and the collections that you have. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Rainey to start talking a bit more about kind of the ideas behind active collections. Rainey.
Great, thank you. And do we have a poll or is Kelly, how's that going?
Yeah, so we do have it. I'm able to click and see it. Let me see if I can share it with the rest of the group. But some of the largest word I'm seeing for everyone is overwhelming, overwhelmed, nervous, hopeful. Um, Let me see if I can get this into the larger chat though. Okay, so I've dropped the responses into the chat. Let me see if you can click on that.
Uh, yeah, complicated. So anyway, I think that Kelly, that gets us close enough, which is, the big three seem overwhelmed, nervous, and hopeful. And so hopefully, during this session, we're going to just make space to acknowledge the overwhelm and then see what we can do to make our collections more hope, to grow that hope, right? Which in many ways is really what active collections is all about. So just in terms of like what is active collections, right? It's a movement I started with two colleagues, Trevor Jones and Ely Wood, and we were all veteran collections workers, museum collections workers, and we were noticing how much the values and practices around collections and museums around the country seemed out of alignment with what was realistic and sustainable in the real world, right? And so in a spirit of tough love, because we're all people who love collections and love museums, so it really is a tough love place. We started asking questions and having conversations with folks around the country to find a better way of stewarding collections. It felt like maybe there was a 20th century model that we were working with, and that it was just simply not going to hold in the 21st century. And so we started working with different colleagues, and we started developing tools to help folks on the grounds doing collections work. We eventually edited this volume of essays from different folks who were thinking and trying new things with collections. Called, the book is called Active Collections, and in general, just we're, trying to help everyone around the country find ways to make their collections more sustainable and more meaningful as well. And this is a pretty organic grassroots kind of movement. It's sort of held together with some gum and twine and band-aids. And it's really started to grow, thanks in no small part to folks like Eileen and Hannah at Vermont Historical Society and other folks all over the country who've really taken this up and done their own experiments or started their own initiatives or put new tools out on the table for collections workers. And really, Vermont Historical Society has become a leader in active collections work. So hooray for Vermont for doing a lot of national modeling here. And you'll hear about some of that later. It's been just really a pleasure to work with VHS over several projects, and I don't know how long, however many years we've been doing this together, Eileen. Okay, next slide. So why did we need active collections? I'm just going to give you a little background here. I entered the field actually 30 years ago in 1996, and I learned all the best practices and standards in my, grad program, where I took a bunch of collections care classes. And then I started working in the trenches in museum collections in several different history museums. And everywhere I went, whether it was the collections I was working with myself or talking to folks at conferences or seeing colleagues' collections behind the scene at their organizations, it became clear that no one was meeting those standards and best practices that we had set for the field. And so there was a real disconnect between what I'd been trained to see as the bar, where the bar was set, and what everyone was actually struggling with day to day on the ground. And, everywhere I saw storage areas overflowing and poorly organized, tremendous backlogs of cataloging and inventorying. Everyone I talked to was overwhelmed. No one felt they actually knew what they had a handle on what it was that was in this collection. And they were afraid to talk about it for fear that they'd get judged for not meeting the standards. So everybody was kind of hiding it, right? And that just didn't feel good. And now, and Eileen, so you can see some examples of what collections really look like around the country, right? Just too much stuff, not a chance to organize it and really get a handle on it. And next slide, Eileen. I can say now I've been doing this work for 30 years. It hasn't gotten better. If anything, it's gotten worse because, for one, museums have kept collecting. So the backlogs are actually growing instead of decreasing. And, in the 90s, we all kind of said if we can just get one more grant or hire one more collections worker, we'll get through the backlog. We'll finally get a handle of things. We'll put it all in order. And, now I can say 30 years later, it's clear that museums just simply aren't funded well enough to support collections at that level. And also, whatever's going on with the scarce resources in our field specifically, there are also these societal trends that I think we now understand more clearly that were maybe developing when I entered the field, but now are pretty prominent, right? And so one is just this the hyper-consumerism. It's increasingly clear that across the country, Americans are drowning in stuff in their daily lives, and that this more and more stuff is starting to actually harm us, right? Not just in museums, but in our society at large. And that, by and large, museums are holding these collections of privilege, and we haven't necessarily collected the way we should have for folks from all across American society, and how overwhelming the size of these collections is getting in the way of our sort of contending with the inequality in our collections. And that also climate change is making very clear we have scarce resources in terms of we can't just keep on expanding our storage areas and they have a carbon footprint, right? So we put all that together and it feels like there's just really a need for attending to the whole model to find something that's more sustainable and realistic. And so next slide, Eileen. So one way we might look at this is that if we need a new model for the 21st century, our active collections ideas on that, after doing a lot of thinking and talking to other folks, is that we think leaner collections with greater impact is the model to put forward and try out and experiment with. And a key part of that is that it felt like there was a lot of, in the 20th century, a focus on quantity of collections. And it feels like now we need to focus on quality, not quantity. And here by quality, I mean quality of meaning, quality of public value for the communities we serve, right? And that we need to work on being much more discerning about what we acquire and keep. And, really sort of make sure we're not on autopilot, that we're really applying critical thinking to the decisions we make about what we keep so that we can pare it down to the most meaningful stuff that really is going to serve our communities. And so we're building this new model, and that if we can move towards leaner collections with greater impact, we can really reduce that overwhelm and increase that hope. And, develop collections that are more sustainable and more effective, and allow us as collection workers to kind of get out from under the pile to really do more meaningful work to serve public audiences. And so with the tools and resources we put together for active collections, or put out for active collections, we're constantly looking for ways to make it as easy and human as possible for folks like y'all who are in the trenches on the ground experiencing overwhelm. And so it's like always this question of how can we help you take one step forward and then another step forward and then another step forward to get you moving towards sustainability and greater impact? How do we shape that path for you and give you easy tools? And that's where Eileen and Hannah come in, because they have been working really hard on how to shape that path in Vermont. And I'm going to turn it over to Eileen, and she's going to tell you more. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Rainey. And again, it has been a journey. We did 8 years plus ago, or so, I think, that we started working with this. And again, I'm just going to talk about a few of the sort of general active collections concepts that we think are really kind of high value for you to start thinking about if you haven't already. And I just want to talk a little bit about what active collections isn't. It's not just throwing stuff away. We do see a fair bit of hesitation for some organizations and people, because that reflects that we are people who preserve, we conserve, we take care of, and this idea that we have too much and we need to get rid of it is hard for us. But you don't have to actually technically deaccession anything and still use active collections concepts. So we think in the long run you might, especially if you're one of the folks who said you had overwhelming collections. But you don't actually have to, but you can work and think with an active collections mindset just as easily. It's not an easy fix. So this is not, unfortunately, we talk about burdens and we talk about a lot of work. Active collections isn't necessarily an easy answer. But we do feel, again, that it has a lot of value. And what it does do is it makes the work have a higher return on investment. So again, whatever you're putting into your collections, you're getting out. I like to say having your collections work for you rather than you working for your collections. And again, it's not the only answer. There are certainly sort of very similar sort of ideas and concepts out there. What we're not trying to do with active collections is to create another set of standards that we can't rise to, or prescriptive tasks that have to be done. What we want to offer or sort of help you find are frameworks, resources, and tools for you and your organization to adapt and adopt some of these ideas in the ways that work for you. And I think, Hannah will talk about this a bit more with our activating program, but I think that's really one of the pieces of that, is trying to figure out how we can help organizations to find their pathway. So what is active collections? Again, we're hoping that active collections work will help you gain a better understanding of your own collections, what you have already, what you don't have or might want to have. And you're going to have that conversation in tandem with your community. And your community is going to be defined by you and aligned with your mission. We also hope that it helps to relieve burdens and, again, energizing your priority work. So helping you to figure out what are the most important or essential pieces of collections work for you to do as your own organization. And then again, the idea is that it's wholly adaptable to your needs and your workflows. There's no A to Z guide for active collections. There are some things, that we sort of can tell you about to do, and it might work to do that flow. Again, what we found in our work is sometimes you start at point A, you go to point C, and then you go back to point B, and it all, again, sort of really depends on your organization. But I think the advantage of that is then it really works for your collection and your needs. So again, as Rainey was talking about, one of the core concepts of active collections is leaner collections with greater impact. And for us, what that means is creating mission-focused collections. So centered around your community, your mission, and not about what anyone sort of thinks they should have. Again, this idea that collections should be less encyclopedic, so that we shouldn't be collecting everything, and more poetic. And I'll talk about poetic in a moment. But we often have policies and collecting scopes focused on what we must do rather than what might be most meaningful or powerful for us. And again, better reflect you as an organization, your community, and that we're really working to inspire rather than require. So these are pieces that when you're thinking about how do collections make you feel, they give you that feeling of like inspiration and hope and pride, and not that you're like, oh, I absolutely have to have this thing. It's a struggle to keep it. And again, we struggle with this idea that we will miss something if we don't have these encyclopedic collections. But again, as Rainey noted, the truth is we've never had encyclopedic collections. We don't have them now. We have too much stuff and we still don't have it all. They don't really reflect the full scope and scale of our culture or our communities. And so you're not doing anything to take away from that. You're still adding to that story by helping to center your collections better. So one of the first things I want to talk about in active collections is a poetic collecting scope. So I'm going to guess that most everyone is familiar with a collecting scope or a scope of collections, which is this general idea of a statement defining what you will or by default will not collect or have in your collections. And again, these tend to be things that are, I want to call them boilerplate. They tend to be very specific. You can see here, I bolded the preserves and interprets statements. I think that's probably is or has been in 90+% of the collecting scopes of every collecting institution in the United States. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it doesn't really speak to what this organization or why this organization is collecting what it is. And so you're trying to come to collection scopes that have, again, more of that, what we say with poetic definition is with rhythm and beauty. It's really reflective. It's really talking about you and your organization and your community in a way that, again, feels inspirational and not like a requirement. So again, the top, this is the Oyster Ponds Historical Society. They said they must collect, must therefore include artifacts and archival materials. So this is, again, a require statement. The after is the first part of their collecting scope, which is actually much longer. And again, you can see it's more action verbs, collecting objects that help residents see their place in a long continuum of people who for hundreds of years have found this place special. And so again, I think, this feels like something more inspirational. It feels like something that's more positive, more specific, even though we could probably all put something together that looks a little bit like this, but it certainly feels like something that speaks more to this specific place and this specific institution. So I'm going to have you think about what we call sort of a little writing exercise here, for your own kind of beginning to think about how you could potentially create a poetic collecting scope. And so one thing to have you do is to think about one community value or descriptor or unique identifier you have in your community. And by community, we talk about this in a general aspect to mean whatever it is defined by you and your organization. So this could be a geographic area, it could be an affinity group, it could be a type of collection. What is your community as an organization? And hopefully you have that. And we have a few of these values kind of we put over to the side if you can read those, just to give you an idea about what you might think about for a value. So I'm going to ask you to choose a value, a community value or a descriptor. Again, can be from that list or your own list. And then think about how you can reflect that in your collecting scope. So how might you put that value into a collecting scope? Would it be part of a bullet point about significant events or programs in your community? Or is there an object that you can think of that reflects that value that you have or that you would like to have in your collection? So I'm going to give you about a minute to think about that. And then if you've got a community value and kind of a way in which you think you can reflect that either in your scope or in your collection, please feel free to share that in the chat. I was thinking about this. We did a similar exercise recently with one of our board committees here at VHS, and it was great. I think probably for us, one of the values that's always kind of comes to the top for Vermont, if you know anything, if you're from Vermont or know Vermont, is independent. And so that was a big value that we put in there. And some of the ideas about things that reflected that included some things like our original Constitution, one of our previous politicians, Jim Jeffords, or Bernie Sanders, who's an independent. So some of these things that kind of reflect the spirit that we have. So I don't know, I don't see anything in the chat yet. So definitely think about if you've got a value. Awesome. Diversity of Native peoples. Fantastic value. Bostonian or musician. They're great. One of the other community values I was thinking of for Vermont as I was driving home the other day was green. I don't know if any of you all have any other states or regions that are defined by a color, but Vermont is defined by a color. So that's sort of an interesting thing of how do we put that into the thoughts about what we're collecting and why we're collecting it. So yeah, anything else? And I will say also with these exercises and sort of resources that we're sharing today, these are available, or versions of these are available on our online resource center, which Hannah will talk about later. So definitely feel like you can go back and find some of these materials and do this. Again, it's a great exercise to do as a group. So if you've got, again, a collections committee or a board or even staff, these kinds of exercises, group exercises, are really great to do together to kind of think about what you're collecting and why you're collecting it. Learning and education, because you're at a university, fantastic. Inclusive, respect, wonderful. Yeah, so these are great values to have. And again, great values to think about how do I reflect those values in our scope of collections. So we're inspiring, we're not necessarily requiring. Adventurous, reflecting visitors from Mount Washington, entrepreneurs. Oh, yes. Great. Wonderful. All right. So we continue to keep the wheels going on that. And I'm going to just kind of move on a little bit to our next kind of big active collections concept, which is tiering, and what we call kind of defining your collections. And so this is sort of one of the bigger tasks, or one of the bigger pieces behind active collections that we think especially has good value. And the two basic tenets of this are not all collections are worth the same, and not all collections should be treated the same. And this is a big change, right? For a lot of us, especially again, like Rainey, if we've been in the business for a few decades, this idea that everything should be treated as the very top piece. Everything needs to have the best humidity control. Everything needs to have the best storage. That idea is not sustainable or attainable. And so how do we think about our collections in a way that shows that things have value for us as an institution and organization and our communities in a way that makes it able for us to actually be able to treat things well and provide the things of value with the resources that they need. And again, this is a big, bold concept. It's a big thing to embrace for a lot of folks. It can be difficult for us. It can be difficult for your volunteers, your board, for folks who especially have an affinity for certain collections, to think about things having different values and to make these judgments. But again, we have already been making these judgments and have been for many years. And this is kind of just acknowledging and bringing it out into the open and into conversation. And so working with tiering, one of the things you can do is work with what we call a tiering chart or a tiering system. Tiering is simply the process of ranking the value of each item or collection that you have. Tiering is unique to your organization. You decide the criteria, you decide the values you assign your items, you decide how you use that process, what your tiering means, what your sort of scale is, and how you use that in what happens to that, and what you do with the results. So you can have, again, as I said before with active collections, you can tier everything and then decide that you're not actually deaccessioning anything, but your tiering may help you to decide what gets better storage conditions or what gets conserved or your conservation dollars. Not everything about this is set in stone, and that's one of the things, again, that we've learned in our work, especially that there might be a little trial and error as you tier your collections. So objects may change over time. They may change as you look at them amongst other objects that you've already looked at, so that you're really looking at ranking things along a continuum. So there's no yes or no, there's no right or wrong in this. It's really kind of trying to work things into this overall continuum and line between what are the things with the most value for your organization and your community, and what are the things that you have in your collections that may not be as high value to you. Again, there's many ways of establishing the system, and I'll talk about a couple of different ones. And then again, this has been used, I'd say, primarily for deaccessioning. That's certainly how we have used it at VHS to start, but it's really also useful or potentially useful for things like risk management. So again, a lot of times you may have insurance companies that want to know what are your most valuable items, or if you had to pick 10 items you would cover under a special rider, what are those items going to be and how are you choosing what those are? How are you deciding which rooms get the fire department in first? Those kinds of materials. Again, identifying and prioritizing your conservation care or needs. And then finding connection stories and new ways of using collections. So by looking at your collections in these ways, you can really find, and I think identify and pull up things like stories, connections, things you didn't know about before, or that you had a chance to talk with different people about. And that's one of the things that this is the process where you can bring other people into your discussions with tiering and really find out more about your community than you might not have known before. So I'm going to show you one tiering chart example to start. This is also from the Oyster Ponds Historical Society. Shout out to Oyster Ponds for being one of the first ones to sort of work on these things, especially with Rainey, and has been very gracious in sharing these items with folks. So you can see they've done a tiering chart that has tiers 1 through 5. And again, this chart is also available on the online resource center, so you don't have to look at the tiny print today and get it all in. And so the idea is that tier 1 are their most important or valuable items, and tier 5 are their least valuable. And you can also see a couple of different things here. They have different criteria. So they have 4 different criteria, which include significance, use, uniqueness, and replaceability. And you can also see there's a couple lines on the columns. Tier 5 has a bold line. For them, that means that tier 5 are items that will be deaccessioned. And there's a dotted line after tier 4, indicating that those are items that may be deaccessioned. And so you can see again a tier 1 object with a significance very significant 2 oyster ponds with a strong provenance, which includes something like a local maker's mark, while their significance on tier 5 is limited or no historical value, limited or no provenance. So again, you can see kind of this continuum that they have come through on each of these criteria, and to try to work towards putting something along this continuum on a tier 1, 2, 3, or 5. And again, these sort of ideas of what significance mean, what uniqueness means, are all criteria that they have worked through as an organization together. And I think the other thing to think about when you're thinking about tiering and what it means for you and what it means for other folks is your tier 1 and your tier 5 may be 100% different than another organization's choices. So a tier 1 at your own organization may be a tier 5 at another organization. And that's part of this. This exercise is understanding also that value is not only unique to you, that there are other organizations that a collection might be more important to. So this is the tiering system that we use here at VHS, which is a grading system. It's basically 100% like your old school style grading in classrooms, where what would be tier 1 is a grade A, which is kept without question. Objects with known Vermont histories that tell compelling stories and are in exhibitable condition. So those are the criteria that we have established. And you'll see exhibitable condition is one of our very specific criteria. We have determined that collections, what we want to do is to be able to use and exhibit them. And so that is part of the grade that they are assigned. Not to say that we won't keep things that are in poor condition. We do have a few things that have exceptional other historic value that we do have in our collections. So there's actually extra credit available in our grading system, because we gotta go old school literally. So, and you can see grade F, objects that should be deaccessioned, objects outside of mission, or objects that have been destroyed. We do also have some or a number of objects that we have deaccessioned that have ended up with a lower grade based on the duplication that we already have in our collections. So that, again, something that's been, that's been looked at and we said, we have 5 of these, we don't need 5 of these. So one of them may receive a grade B or C, but the rest of them are going to get a lower grade. Again, the easiest things to define on these systems are going to be your tier 1s and your tier 5s, or your grade A's and your grade F's. So again, for us, for VHS in Vermont, again, something that's mission related, we are the Vermont Historical Society. If it does not have a Vermont connection, it basically is automatically a grade D or F. Like, we're not keeping it. It's not ours. It's not for the Vermont Historical Society. So that's kind of one of the really easy ways to think. Grades kind of B, C, and D are really the hardest to define. Again, they may have sort of gaps in a variety of ways. It might be sort of like you don't quite know the story, their condition's kind of bad or not great. Or again, you have things that are in better condition that tell the same story or tell the same piece of your history, your topic, or your type of object that you want to have. So the next thing we're going to do is a little bit of a quiz, because we're talking about grades. So you're all going to get an A on this quiz no matter what. But we have 2 objects from the VHS collections. And Kelly, this is where I'm going to ask you to do poll 2. So these are 2 items. One is a grade A and one is a grade F item. And for those of you who might see one, they're both dresses. One is a 2-piece 19th century, what I have called mauve, I believe, dress. And then the one on the right is a black, I believe it's velvet with kind of a white collar on it. So which one, based only on the information you have in front of you, do you think is a grade A? And which one do you think is a grade F? And again, you 100% don't have the information you need to actually make this choice in reality, but I just want to kind of showcase a couple of things. about this. One is that there's no automatics in tiering necessarily. Like the age of an item may or may not be something that automatically makes it valuable. The materials that it's made out of may or may not make it automatically valuable. Neck and neck. This is exciting. Give me couple more seconds. See what wins out. Almost 50-50. Somebody just did that to make it 50-50, I think. 52. All right. Oh, all right. Slight lead for the mauve dress. And actually, that is the grade F for us, for the Vermont Historical Society. Not that it's not a lovely dress. The reason it was a grade F for us is it has no known Vermont connection. So again, for us, that automatically means that it's not something that we're going to value highly. The B is actually the third inaugural gown for Madeline Kunin, who was the first and only female governor so far of the state of Vermont. So that is one of our absolute top tier items that we have in our collections. So no matter what you think of the fashion of either one of them, the value is again part of really what their story is or how they are connected to our mission. All right, we're going to do one more. So Kelly, if you could launch poll number 3, one of these spoons is a grade A and one of them is a grade F. And again, this is slightly to be silly. They're both silver, I can tell you that much. I will also tell you that we at one point had over 300 spoons in our collection. We are not a spoon museum. And so I think the idea that we need to keep 300 spoons or that 300 spoons have the same value to us is something, really for us to examine, to think about. And these are the kinds of questions that active collections is going to make us think about. And you might think, well, 300 spoons don't really take up a lot of space. But every little bit of resource counts for our organizations because we have very finite and limited numbers. And so I again, wanting to think about what these things mean and these choices mean as you start to look at them, what are the pieces of information that you need to have when you're making these decisions? How are you looking at them both as an individual object, like this is a spoon, but also as we have 300 spoons or this whole amount of spoons in our collection? And how do we work within both of these spheres to figure out what may or may not be the type of pieces that are most valuable to us? Okay. So somehow you all are choosing the correct grade A spoon, which is the left spoon. I feel like we're doing a little Indiana Jones here. It's the Grail is a slightly less fancy looking one, so it's the more important piece. But it's the left spoon. The right spoon, again, it's a lovely spoon. No Vermont connection. So not spoon we want to keep. The spoon on the left is all about the story, and this is why I love it and why I like to use it as an example, especially for historical collections, but it also works for archival and for art collections as well, is really what the meaning or story is behind it is what's really going to give that object the context and why it's important for us as museums to help folks and interpret and share these stories. So this spoon on the left was made by a company called Eaton and Cole in Westminster, Vermont, in the late 1700s. And it was reportedly, and I'm going to say this is story, the truth and fiction is all within this, melted down from shoe buckles given to a woman named Rhoda Alexander Harlow, given to her by a British soldier she secretly nursed back to health after she found him lying in their cornfield, hurt after he fled the Battle of Bennington in 1777. And he was there at their house in secret for 3 months, hidden from everyone, including her brother, who was a member of the Green Mountain Boys, which were opposing the British. And so in thanks, he gave her these shoe buckles, which she melted down and made 5 spoons, one for each of her children. And this is one of the only 2 spoons known left to exist. So That was a really long story about a spoon that we probably don't think about or have in our collections. But again, I think it just, to me, sort of illustrates this idea of what story and provenance and significance is going to mean when you're thinking about your tiering decisions and the conversations that you're having about your collections. And again, just to remember that that spoon on the right doesn't mean it doesn't have value for anybody, just because it's not something that we need to keep in our collections. Maybe it's a amazing spoon from Minnesota, and we would love to give it to the Minnesota Historical Society for the amazing Minnesota story that it has. I don't know that for sure. So I think that's, again, some of these things to think about when you're doing all that. So thank you again for playing along with my spoon quiz. And kind of the last thing for you to think about with tiering, and again, I just want you to take a think on this before we move along to some of the practical concepts, is to think about an object in your collection that you would consider tier one, and what are some of the attributes that would make that a tier one. So again, how does it speak to your mission? How does it speak to your community, or those values that we talked about before? And then as you're thinking about your tier one object, what is it one of your tier five objects? And what are the differences between that and your tier one object? So again, think about that for a second and feel free to put those responses in the chat. And maybe you have your own tier one spoon. I do love that Lindy says could eat a lot of ice cream with 300 spoons. We haven't even begun to talk about the ideas behind using your collections in different ways as part of active collections work. And yes, Rainey, thank you. So often the value is in the story. Limestone is tier one. Nice. Varsity sweater from high school and Manchester Historical. So again, a community historical society. Awesome. A great story. Yes. Personal account of world record wind. I love that. Mount Washington. Fantastic. These are great pieces. I want to know if anybody has more than 300 spoons personally. We also had 150 chairs, I think, at one point. We have fewer than that now. Again, this is something, again, not that there's necessarily anything we want to say wrong with the way that people collected before. That was part of what we were told, part of what was the process of the progress. So we don't want to, none of the points of active collections is to consider what people did in the past negatively. They were doing things based on the knowledge and the information and the standards that they were given, and they're doing their best to really help us do a lot of great preservation and care. And so this is just moving those pieces forward. Great tier five duplicates. Yes, so many duplicates. Nice. Wonderful. All right. So again, we have different tiering charts and examples on the ORC. So I encourage you, if you want to think about tiering, or again, starting to think about some of these exercises, to get your brain moving and thinking about what tiers might mean or how you might value your collection. I encourage you all to go to that. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Hannah to talk about our Activating 21st Century training program. Hannah.
Hello. All right. So I will just jump right in. We've talked like a little bit like tangentially around this project already. But just a sort of overview of the goal of the project. This is a 2-year long program where I work directly on site with a cohort of local historical societies for a year, and then so we've just about finished our first year, and we are now moving into our second year. here, and super excited for the next batch of folks to work with. I see that Pat's on the call, and that's very exciting. And also it's great to be at this point where we have half the project under our belts now, and so we kind of have some insights from on the ground of how active collections projects can actually manifest in real life. In this is we've thought about our tiers, we've thought about like what we may or may not want, we've had all the conversations about what our scope should be, and now we're going to say, all right, let's go move some stuff around. And so for local historical societies, small museums, even we had a library in our last cohort that also has historical collections. The mission is really straightforward, right? You're focused on maybe a geographical area or a tight-knit community, and ideally it's small. What we've found is that local historical societies also have too much stuff, and they also really need this work. And so we do all the projects have focused on figuring out what your priorities are, whether that's through tiering or just spending time with the objects more, reorganizing the space so that it's more accessible for volunteers to get in and out and actually work with the objects, and also deaccessioning some things. And in some cases, finally getting rid of things that have already been deaccessioned but have been sitting around for years and years, because that final step of letting go is really hard. So we've had a good range of projects that have covered all of those pieces, and helped to get our cohort members to a point where they feel like they're moving towards a collection that is a better size for their space, or they're feeling like their community is becoming more involved, and they feel a little less overwhelmed, maybe a little closer to whelmed. And another big thing that Eileen has already touched on today that I want to reemphasize is to use what you already have. So while you are thinking about maybe you need to move some things out of your collection and into somebody else's collection, or to make some more space, you can also think about what do you already have that you should be taking better care of, that is very special, or that you could use in educational programs, new exhibits. What can you use to refresh your space in your collections? And then also you can use this to assess new donations. And so I have, actually go to the next slide, some good examples of projects from the cohort members. And so this is my first set of progress pictures here, which I am so proud of them. So this is a organization from our past cohort who decided that their project was going to be focused on working with their painting and like framed prints and map storage, which previously was okay but not great. There was just a lot of sort of like over the years, it became really hard to keep everything upright and organized, and there were way too many paintings for the shelf. And as we found going through, there were a ton of duplicates and things that were just there because they looked cool and not really because they were valuable to their mission. And some of them were like reprints of reprints. And so this project manifested itself as a goal of just moving everything over to a new storage rack, which, as you can kind of see in the picture on the right, there is archival foam. There are little supports, about 4 of them per shelf, that keep things more upright and not leaning on each other. And there's also archival blueboard cut to size in between each painting, to make sure that they're not bumping up against each other, they're not stabbing each other with their little hangers. And the rack is also on wheels, and as you can see, there is actually some empty space on the rack as well. And so what made that possible was the process that they put into place. And I thought that this was such a great process to just kind of kill many birds with one stone. And so as each painting came off of the old shelving. It was taken, we took a good picture of it, that then was able to go in and update the photo that's on their public catalog, so folks can see these paintings online as well. We updated information in the catalog, removed old hanging wire that wasn't going to be used anymore, and then placed them in based on size. So we had large paintings on the bottom, small paintings on the top and the middle. Left some room for more things to go in, because an essential goal of this was accessibility for regular swapping out of paintings and maps in the space. So another big piece of this was identifying potential deaccessions. And I think that we wound up with almost a full shelf of potential deaccessions that are ready to be, assessed in more detail. But being able to just have that preliminary moment of we're not sure if this is really part of the collection or not, was great, and it felt like a really efficient process. So can go ahead to the next slide there. All right, completely different situation here. This is another one of our cohort members from last year, that they unfortunately had to fully replace the floor in their space. And that meant that the entire collection had to be removed and stored elsewhere, for about a year. And while they were unable to access their space, a couple of really large objects had to stay in there. And they were able to do some small projects in the space where they were storing things in the meantime on, sorting through old stereographs and determining which ones were actually from the town and which ones were not from the town, and whether those ones that were not from the town could be used in a program with high schoolers to show them how stereographs work, because those could be handled, and then to keep the ones that were of their town, stored away safely. So that was a small project that they did, but I just wanted to share this, and I love it, that they had a volunteer who is a really skilled carpenter and just loves doing projects. And so he decided to make a scale model of their building, and of all of the major large pieces of furniture and some actual exhibit pieces. You can see that there's my hand in the picture. I'm holding a little model of this old post office piece. I don't know counter. I don't know exactly what to call it, but it is literally from the old post office. And so you can see the backside with some stickers of how it worked. And then on the front, it has like the windows and where things would go in. It's a really cool, like potentially interactive piece. It's also huge. And so knowing where that's going to go before they move everything back in, that's like a one and done move kind of thing. So being able to play around with this in the scale model, I thought was really fun and efficient, and was a great way for them to make the most of their time, even though they were unable to access their space. So I think that some good insights there are to really utilize whatever special interests and skills your people have. And so whether that's volunteers or staff, if there's something that they can do that might make this more fun or interesting or a little less overwhelming, just really take advantage of that. And also think small, and there's always a way to overcome like even giant problems like not being able to access your building. Yeah, we can go ahead to the next slide. All right, another picture that I'm in. So I talked a little bit before about assessing new donations. So this is a pretty fun one. This historical society decided that their project for the summer was going to be assessing and tiering as much of their textile collection as they possibly could, because they knew that they had way too many textiles, not enough space to store them, and they also faced some difficulties with being in a historic house where they have minimal control over temperature and humidity, not much electricity in the collection storage spaces. So they are working with what they've got, and that also means that any space that they can save is essential. So tiering for them has the express goal of identifying potential deaccessions, duplicates, and also then strategizing about where to store things based on the value that those objects have to the historical society. So the most important pieces that they identified are going to get the best storage that they can give them. Um, and things that are, you know, kind of lower tiers, they're going to put those in the rooms that get hotter in the summer or something like that. They're okay with knowing that not every storage space is perfect, but doing the best they can for the objects that are really bringing them meaning. Um, this dress is a wedding dress that was offered to them by somebody who was actually out of state, but had family ties to the area, and it was worn by, I think, her grandmother. And they were able to, this offer came in when we were maybe a month or two into developing their tier chart. And so we were at a point where the tier chart had been used with probably about 50 objects in their textile collection, and they felt pretty comfortable with the wording and how they were interpreting the tier chart for textiles specifically. So it actually came in at a really good time to just test it out. And this turned out to be, I want to say a tier two, but it was like a high tier two. So it was worn by a woman who was not local, but she married a man from this town. And then eventually they moved back and lived there for quite some time. So even though this wedding dress was not necessarily made in the town or worn in the town, it had a strong tie and like contextualized their community within Vermont at the time. And so that was an interesting story behind it that didn't hit like, okay, this was made by somebody and worn here and used here forever, which is like really the top tier of things that they were looking for. But they were able to pull out that story and say, all right, we can store this easily, we can take care of it, and it's not bringing in any weird bugs or anything. And all of those pieces kind of came together to make that a tier two, and they were really excited to accept the donation. So that is all I have to say on that side. So we've got some wrapping up here to do, and then hopefully we'll have enough time for questions. So some kind of final thoughts on community. You should absolutely bring your community in to help you make these decisions. I think it is always better to be transparent and to be as open about your collection decisions as possible because we are holding these things in public trust and we want the community to be involved. And also, especially for, you know, if you're looking at community as being a small town or as an affinity group, I think that you are only empowered to make these decisions more by involving the people who they represent in those decisions as much as you can. And also accepting that sometimes it is going to be hard to say, hey, we're going to get rid of this thing because it's not from here. Or we don't think that this piece represents our history as well as something else. But those discussions are so important. And really think about the whole spectrum of experiences that your area and your community has experienced, right? How can you make sure that everyone finds something that they feel they can connect to in your museum? And I think that also this really important thing is that you can't change the decisions that were made in the past about your collections. You definitely need to go in with an open mind and not feel ashamed of your organization's structure or how things are stored. This is really just moving on, moving forward, thinking about what can we keep for the future that we wish that we had, right? And so we can go on to the next slide. So just a couple points to really hammer home here. we know that the system of collecting everything A to Z is unsustainable and largely impossible. And so we shouldn't try to force that. Change is necessary, and hopefully some of these strategies will help you do that. So really, really make your collections work for you and don't overwork yourself for objects that are not contributing something value-wise. And also really, really practice the discernment. Be critical about your objects. Not critical in a bad way, but critical, like think it through from all angles. What possible thing does this have to offer you, and how can you integrate that into your presentation of your museum and your collections. So last one. Awesome. So next steps. I think that you should absolutely do one thing, right? So pick one idea and start working on it. Maybe that's tiering. Maybe that is moving your storage around so that you can actually access things. Maybe it's deaccessioning. But just pick one angle, and that can be your sort of in. That's how you get into active collections work. Know thyself. This is a fun one. So really, you should know your organization's mission like the back of your hand, and have that really like in your heart while you do this work. Another one, treat your incoming collections actively. So what pieces were not done with your existing collections that you wish were done? Is that how they're stored? Is it how they're labeled? Those pieces are so important. And so even if you can't change everything that was done previously in your collection, you can do it with the new things that come in. And then also build a community. So hopefully, I see lots of conversations happening in the chat. Hopefully there's some community building happening already. But just know that you're not alone in doing this work, and you can absolutely find others who are interested and willing to help out, to share ideas, much like our cohort has done this past year. But that is really the most essential piece, is to band together and get the work done. So that is about it. We can now open it up to questions. And also just quick plug for the online resource center. It is a constant work in progress. And so I will be continuing to add more resources to it over the next year. But it is usable and has resources in it. So please go check it out.
Great. So again, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. I'm going to stop my screen share in a second, and we can have discussions.
And while we're waiting for the questions to come in, there are a few things I want to emphasize from all three presentations that hopefully, like as we're wrapping up, you can keep in your mind. And one is to just say over and over again, when we talk about value or quality, we mean value to your community, we mean usefulness and meaning for your community. We don't mean monetary value. We don't mean necessarily quality in the sense of, connoisseurship. It's like, how does this stuff serve your community, right? That's really the key. So just emphasizing that. And let's see, we've got a question about collection insurance. What is available? That's all. We could talk a long time about that. Typically, I'll say a few words, and then are there even resources on the resource hub about insurance, y'all?
Not yet. I think that I'll write that down. That's a good one to add, maybe.
Typically, you're wanting what's thought of as a fine arts insurance policy. And so it's a distinctive kind of policy that covers a collections like this, and it's typically called fine arts, even though you might have historical objects instead. And and so it's a specific type of insurance, and some of the museum associations have information about insurance on their websites too, like AAM or ASLH. And so you're trying to find an insurance provider who will write you a fine arts policy. And then there's a kind of process for figuring out what levels of insurance you want. And sometimes it's based on sort of uh, assuming that the chances you'd lose the entire collection in one go are slim. So what's the value of, like one storage area's worth of your collection, or what's the value of your most important pieces? Again, your top tier. I think that's about what we can say on this, but
Yeah,
the resources, Eileen.
great. Yes, and I will say, yeah, there's entire webinars on insurance, so we can find you those if you can't find them yourselves. Comment about Samantha Forsco's book, Practical Collections Care. Yes, excellent. And again, I think, as I said, I think Rainey and Trevor and Ellie are sort of one of the first groups to kind of really put this into, what this can mean. But there's lots of folks that have been working, especially in recent years, on really helping provide resources and tools and ideas to make a lot of these processes more, again, practical and doable for us all. Um,
I love to see how y'all are sharing resources for folks in
yes,
chat
right?
too. You're helping answer questions for each other. Um, and yeah, we did the shelving. Somebody answered about the
Yep.
shelving. Okay.
So a question about actively using collections objects, handling or activating them in ways that might affect their material but seem worth it for various reasons. Yes.
Great. So, the standards and best practices we inherited were very much like, you know, you have to be so careful with everything, and you can't ever let anybody touch it, like it must be protected to the nth degree. And I think we're starting to understand that there may be some specific objects that are so valuable and so unique that you really want to be careful to make sure that they're being preserved. But then again, there are many objects held by museums where they're a lower tier, right? Their significance is not as strong. And it may be that it's the duplicates, or it may be stuff that's really a dime a dozen. There was so much stuff created in the 20th century that lots of local collections have, and it's like it's in every collection, right? So that there are plenty of things that could go in a teaching collection where they can be handled and used, where they could be, per perhaps too, things that you are ready to deaccession could be given to local artists for them to use as material for their work. Or there are also ways of creative and meaningful destruction that might serve a purpose for your community. And that it is, as a field, we should be experimenting with that and playing around with what ways can these objects serve our communities, that would warrant, using them, destroying them, giving them to someone else. And that thinking about that and trying things out should be acceptable, right? And so, I think this is a time of experimentation. And again, you want to be thoughtful about it, and use your critical thinking skills. But that's all stuff we should be considering, right? And part of this too is, I think that's something that came up that I want to mention, sort of threaded through. I talked about how there was a lot of negative peer pressure when I entered the field, that like everybody has to hide it. if they're not meeting the standards because they feel so much shame about not meeting the standards and that their colleagues are going to judge them for having problems in their collection, right? And we really need to replace that. Sorry, I don't know why my thumbs up is. In general, I'm totally all up for the thumbs up. Thumbs up to all of you. That we need to replace that negative peer pressure with positive peer pressure to cheerlead each other on, to find the new ways and the new tools to make our collection sustainable. And so I'm always going to root for y'all trying things. It's my goal to never judge y'all. Call me out if I do, because what I'm trying to do is see us all move forward. And I think the more we can do that together and support each other in trying things and sharing what's been working, right? What else
I also, oh, I was just gonna say also on the like handling using objects, one of the things that has made deaccessioning or moving something out of the permanent collection and into a teaching collection feel really good for some of our cohort members is just knowing that if they have duplicates. And so being able to say like, all right, like we've got a copy of this, and so let's let one of them get used and it's now a consumable object. And this other one is our thing that we try to hold on to for as long as we can keep it in good shape. Not forever. Can't hold on to anything forever. Um, but I think that idea of like baby steps towards being able to handle and use things is amazing. I also, I mean, I really do love the idea of just kind of radically saying we're gonna let a 3-year-old touch this. I know that one of our colleagues in Maine, who we talked to in June, handles maps, and so if anybody comes in and wants to see a map in their library, they are able to say, "Yes, we will let you see this." And like that 3-year-old probably isn't going to handle the most valuable one unsupervised, but they will make it happen. And so I think that is a really brave and also like powerful connection to allow.
And another piece of this, just to emphasize fully, is that tools like the tiering chart, tiering your collection, or creating a poetic collecting scope, right? Those are tools to set a really high bar for what you have in your collection so that it's sustainable in the sense that it's stuff that's really worth having. It's powerful, it's meaningful, it helps your community in some way, right? It has great stories. And so a poetic scope, poems use very few words and each word packs a punch. So if you think about a poetic collection, it's a collection that has fewer pieces in it, but each piece packs a punch. And so that is like setting the bar higher. And tiering lets you see, and those collection statements, the scope statements, typically we set very low bars. It's like basically like anything and everything related to our town, and we reserve the right to collect things that aren't related to our town if we think there's a reason, right? That's a very low bar for what goes in the collection. And so it's like, what are these ways to set the bar high and for us to then start discerning what meets the bar and what doesn't, right? And so just starting to get used to that thinking, and then trying to find the tools to start working with the collection in those different ways. Okay, what other what other questions do we have here?
I
So,
like
question.
the one
Mm,
about the next question down. So something that may have a connection to your town, but you have no documentation. So how do you handle that? This is something that we've handled this summer. So I would love to have a straightforward answer for you, right? I would love to be like, this is exactly what you should do with it. There's a point where the amount of research that you are putting into an object is greater than the value that the object is giving back to you. And so if it has no documentation, then it likely has no story. I have some thoughts about whether a story that it comes with, even if there's no documentation, like an oral history of this object, that I think is kind of its own thing, where if you have heard something from a previous volunteer about the story behind this object, that may be enough to hold on to it for a little bit and think, how could we like corroborate this, right? How can we find out whether this actually is what we think it is? But there really is a point where if there's no documentation, there's no documentation, and unfortunately, the value has left the object. The story has been separated from it, and it is just an old thing, and it is not something really special that connects us to our history. And so I think at that point, something with no documentation that's not from your town might not be valuable to your specific organization. But that is kind of a long-winded way to say it's up to you. Yeah.
Another way to look at that might be, what type of object is it, right? If it's a really interesting looking object, or it seems unique, or visually rich, then I'm going to spend a little more time on that than a dime a dozen thing that you can see in any local historical society that isn't particularly interesting looking, right? Or is, one of many duplicates, right? Then that's going to not be very high priority. Whereas if it's something that's just really fascinating, okay, maybe that's worth digging into a little bit more. But, part of this is, as Hannah's saying, it's like, where are you going to put your effort? And our old values and standards were telling us we must, with every single object, put in the maximum amount of effort. And that's just not sustainable. And so it's prioritizing. Eileen, you seem to have something you wanted to say on that too. No?
No, I think that I think everything that always, as you say, is great, Rainey. And I think again, that idea of the things that we can tell you, or you can do a tiering system, and then you find something and it kind of was like, but this thing. And I think that's also the other piece, to say like, but this thing, and have those discussions and be open while still being able to make the decisions. And so that's the other, like, how do you come to this ability? And there's work to this. And I think, Hannah, you've seen this a lot of, like, how do you work as a group, as a community, as an organization to build these skills to be able to say, okay, we can make this decision, feel confident about it, feel like we're on board with it. And we might need to make a decision based on something in our town, something political that we have to deal with. I mean, we'll say it here, like, sometimes you have donors that you have to make different decisions about some collections objects for. You hopefully can get them to come along with you as well as you increase your relationships, but that this is part of the skill building piece, is to not have to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to make one set decision on everything, and that's never going to change, and sort of allowing ourselves to learn as we go along as well. So we're at 3:30, and I know we have a couple questions that are still in the chat, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So I want to just remind everybody that we'll be here next week on the 10th to answer questions. And I think we can start with the questions that are still unanswered, as well as if you all who've asked the questions are not able to come next week, just let us know, or let us know through CCCA as well if you didn't catch our emails, to help answer some of those questions. So, Erica, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Eileen, and thanks to all three of you presenters. This has been such a terrific introduction to active collections. It seems like from all the chatter in the chat, it's been very thought-provoking and already useful for folks who are attending today. Definitely want to second Eileen's encouragement for you to attend the conversation with colleagues session next week. Come with general questions, come with questions that are specific to your organization as well. We'd be happy to spend some more time with you talking about active collections. I also wanted to put in a plug for an additional CCCA event happening next week for those of you who are already members, either professional affiliate or emerging professionals. We have our annual meeting coming up on Monday from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Definitely encourage you to come. We will be doing a recap of 2025 activities. We'll have board elections going into 2026. And then we'll also be starting to talk about program planning for 2026. We'd love to have your input. If you're not able to attend, or if you are not currently a member but have a great idea for a program that we can offer, please feel free to follow up to the general CCCA email account, the one that you received the notifications about the program links for this event to. And we will definitely take those into account as we start planning for next year's programming. In the meantime, thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.